Book of Mark. Mark chapter 16. You're good. Mark chapter 16. We're looking at the end of the book of Mark here. Verse 47 of chapter 15 was as far as we got. And it sets the stage for the resurrection of Christ. The ladies, remember, that followed him in Galilee. We talked about that last time. And then Joseph of Arimathea had him buried. And then verse 47, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, beheld where he was laid. So, in other words, they followed it after when Jesus was taken to be buried and marked that spot. In other words, remembered, so they could go back. It's a new tomb. We believe that's in another book. One of the other, it's either in Matthew, Luke, or John, but it's a new tomb, so this might have been a burial place like a cemetery. I don't know that, as the Bible doesn't discuss that. But even so, they would have had to know which cave to look in, because the Bible said he had hewn it out of a rock and sort of made an artificial cave. And so chapter 16 begins, and when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome had bought sweet spices that they might come and anoint him. So we sort of talked about that too. Sort of a Jewish thing, that if we were to look deeper into it, it's an Eastern custom. It's sort of like, we have traditions. We're kind of getting away from them here, but when I was a kid, you had a wake service, and then they had a funeral during the next day, and then they went to the cemetery and had another little service. So that's kind of our thing. Well, this was their thing, to go and to anoint the body with spices. I'm not talking about touching. I'm talking about pouring it on the grave clothes. It was a way of honoring the dead. It would deal with the smell, obviously, and then also it was to give honor and to show that they respected the dead. It's not an unusual thing. It's just a different in that time period and in that place. And they may still do that today. I don't know, but that's why they went there. And so, and very early in the morning, the first day of the week, they came unto the sepulchre at the rising of the sun. So it was very, very still more or less dark out. And they said among themselves, "Who shall roll away the stone from the door of the sepulchre?" So apparently they had forgotten to think that through. And so in their anxiousness to get there, they hadn't thought, we better get some help. So they just went on and went to the tomb, but now they were realizing this isn't going to be too good because we don't have a way to move that rock. And when they looked, verse 4, they saw the stone was rolled away, for it was very great. In other words, what the Bible's saying is you could see this at a distance because this was a large stone. So the best guess would be that it was round and that you could roll it. They said, "Who shall roll it away?" So maybe it was in a trench or some sort of groove where that you could roll it, but it was big enough to where that it would take quite a bit of effort to roll it. It was also large enough where at a distance you could see that it was moved. So it wasn't like you had to actually get there. They were walking along and they remembered the spot, and even in the darkness in the early morning, they could tell it wasn't where it was supposed to be. And entering into the sepulcher, that strikes me as fairly courageous to just walk up there and the stones rolled and you just walk in. But they did. They walked in. They saw a young man sitting on the right side, clothed in a white garment, and they were affrighted. Now, I'd be affrighted to go in if nobody was there. what frightened them was not that there was a dead body there. What frightened them was that they saw somebody that wasn't the dead body. There was a living person sitting in there, and clothed in a white garment. That scared them. And there's a lot of that theme goes throughout this little story here, as Mark tells it. I call it little because his is very condensed, where some of the others are a little bit more elaborate. They go into more detail. But this is the way God gave it to Mark. And so Mark just kind of whisks right through this. But the fear and the fright of it is part of it. They're seeing beings that they can't really explain. And so here, and plus they can't find the body. The body's gone. So a lot of the things that Jesus had said haven't sunk in yet. He had told them, warned, maybe that's not the right word, foretold, I should say. He foretold that this would be, but yet their response is as though that he never said anything. So they were affrighted, and he saith unto them, be not affrighted. In other words, don't be afraid. Ye seek Jesus of Nazareth, which was crucified. He is risen. He's not here. Behold the place where they laid him. So he's very matter of fact about it. He just says simply that he's risen from the dead, which is a miracle, obviously, but he says it matter of factly and says, right here's where he was, where they laid him. They saw him laid there the day before. He says, but go your way, tell his disciples and Peter that he goeth before you into Galilee. There shall ye see him as he said unto you. So the angel reminds them that Jesus had told them, after I rise again, I will see you in Galilee. This is getting into sort of the most important aspect of this. Jesus had it, when he spoke those words before his death, he expected them to remember it. And he's expecting that by word of mouth, this will go from one person to the other. And then we're going to find out what his expectations are about that if we have the time and get to it today. I don't go real fast, so we may not be able to get to it. But anyway, he says, this is what he told you. He told you he would go to Galilee. He told you that's where he would meet you. And so I want you to go your way and pass the word along. Tell his disciples and Peter that he goeth before you into Galilee. There shall ye see him as he said unto you. So he's just sort of emphasizing that. They went out quickly and fled from the sepulchre. So fled is an interesting word. They ran away from it, for they trembled and were amazed. Neither said they anything to any man, for they were afraid. So they were meeting people, but they weren't stopping to talk. They were scared. But yet they were obeying. God doesn't expect you to not have any feelings or emotions when you're doing something that he asked you to do. This angel says, I want you to go tell his disciples that he's going to meet them in Galilee, just like Jesus already told you before. So he was just reiterating what Jesus had told them. But the fact that they're all afraid and running and scared and can't even stop to talk to anybody, there's no mention. Jesus is not upset about that. There is something he is upset about. We're going to get to that. But he's not upset about the fact that they're afraid or scared or they have these feelings. Verse 9, now when Jesus was risen, early the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 devils. So we're sort of getting it's a narrative device that you use. It's just sort of like stepping back and repeating something. Mary's there with Mary, the mother of James, and the Salome, but he's telling us something that we find out in one of the other books, that she was the first person he met. It's not actually going to give us the meeting, the words that were spoken. That's in another book of the Bible. But James is just saying, now, he did appear to her first, and they talked. That's all Mark is saying here. And Mary Magdalene is identified in more than one place as someone out of whom he cast 7 devils. In our society and day, we say, well, could you please drop that and not remind me of that? In the Bible, that's not that way. Simon the leper. You ever hear of Simon the leper? He's in the Bible. And this one and that one, that Jesus did this for them. If you were drunk and you got saved, would you want to be known as, Tony the drunk? No. But yet, if that's what you earned and you're not a drunk anymore, it's not that bad. She had 7 devils in her. And she's the woman and that's probably part of her testimony. I'm Mary Magdalene, and Jesus cast 7 devils out of me. I'm sure she told it herself. But that's how she's identified here. Not every time, but more than once, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, Mark just stops to say she's the one he met first. No actual dialogue or anything. Verse 10, though. And she went and told them that had been with him. So she went to the disciples personally. And apparently, here it's just saying, even though all 3 of them were told what to do, she's the one that went to actually where the 11 disciples were. What were they doing? She went there as they mourned and wept. So to them, this whole thing was over. Okay. I don't think the Lord had a problem with that. He's going to have a problem, but that's not his problem. It's not his problem that they mourned and wept. They'd been told that he was going to rise again, but I think he would have been okay with it, even though they mourned and wept, as though that he was dead and that was it. This is over. It's all failure to flop. And apparently, now this is not quite clear if they were hiding, but they were always together and not really talked about as being out in public at this point. So whether they were hiding or not, I'm not satisfied of that. Not sure that I've heard that said. But it does say that they were just in mourning. So it's like a loved one has died. Our friend is dead. And so they're having a funeral of their own, you might say. It says, and they, when they had heard that he was alive and had been seen of her, believed not. So this is where the problem starts. Now, we're not maybe in tune with this like maybe even we ought to be. So let's go a little farther with it. After that, he appeared in another form unto 2 of them as they walked and went into the country. So this is rehearsing for us very quickly. Mark is, again, very brief book. So he doesn't go into it, but he's talking about the road to Emmaus. And you can find that in one of the other Gospels. And Jesus comes, now when he says another form, he's not talking about a 3-headed monster. He's talking about he appears different. He looks like a different man. But before he's done with them, he reveals himself and lets them see who he is. But here's the point what Mark is making. Verse 13, and they went and told it unto the residue, neither believed they them. So Mary Magdalene goes and says, I've seen Jesus, he's alive. I don't believe it. So then these 2 go and say, we saw Jesus, he's alive. I don't believe it. So we see now the problem that's building here. Afterward, he appeared unto the 11 as they sat at meat. So Jesus comes personally now and walks in the room with the doors shut. I'm getting that from one of the other books, but because Mark doesn't mention it, but that's what he did. But he appeared unto them as they were sitting there eating and upbraided them with their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they believed not them which had seen him after he was risen. So Jesus doesn't say, I'm upset because you were mourning, and when they told you. He doesn't say that. You were weeping, and I don't like that. He didn't say that. His problem is, when you heard the message by word of mouth, you didn't believe it. Now, we live in a time when people say, I don't believe your word of mouth anyway. And we were kind of laughing before Sunday school about, I think we're sort of jaded because we've heard so many things from so many people who are supposed to be experts or people in authority, and we find out later on that what they told us wasn't true. And so we get kind of jaded, sort of calloused, and we say, I don't believe anything anybody says. But Jesus here says, I expected you to believe them when they told you. First of all, I told you that it was going to happen. So that should have been enough. But when they came to you and said, hey, I saw Jesus, you should have believed it. And then when the other two came and told you, that should have been enough to reinforce it, and you should have believed it. So when he says he upbraided them, so to upbraid is to scold. You're like jumping on them and saying, and he's not upbraiding them about their unbelief. He's upbraiding them with their unbelief. He's taking their unbelief and he's holding it out before them and saying, look, you're hard-hearted. You don't believe. He said here, their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they believed not them, not him. You didn't believe them. So the message to the church here would be, hey, look, and to the world around at large, but to the church first, is when you hear the word come from God, you're to believe it. You're not to question that. Somebody said, well, I question that individual. Hey, the message is not the man. The message is Christ. Now, I'm not going to dispute that if we as Christians have a bad reputation, that it's going to damage the message and it's how it goes out. It sure will. People, we have an obligation to walk in such a way that the message is not harmed. But at the end of the day, I can't stand before God and say, well, I didn't believe because all the messengers you sent, they had flaws. It's not going to cut it, folks. The message doesn't have a flaw. And you're not going to find a messenger who doesn't have a flaw. And as the old saying goes, you don't want to go to church because it's full of hypocrites. Well, you'll either go to church with them here or you go to hell with them after. But anyway, that might have seemed a little rough to you, but that's the facts. He says, I got a problem with your unbelief. I got a problem that you don't believe the message. I got a problem that when you hear the message that I told you at the start that I was going to rise from the dead and meet you in Galilee. And then when people come to you and tell you, hey, it's come to pass, you don't believe it. And so he upbraided them. He scolded them. He held it up before them and said, I've got a problem with this. Then he says in verse 15, and he said unto them. So this is often called the Great Commission. Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. So it's called the Great Commission. A commission would be an assignment. So it's the Great Commission or the Great Assignment or the great single most important job of the church. If the church doesn't put the message of the gospel out there first, if that's not our first job, then we don't really have a job. Our first job is not to build gymnasiums. Our first job is not to have get-togethers. Our first job is not to feed the hungry. I'm not attacking anything. I'm saying that's not our first job. Okay, if we do that, I'm not blowing up on that or anything. But our first job is the gospel message. That's clear, whether it be overtly by just telling it, or whether it be sort of by an example of the way we live. That's our first example. First job is the church has no other purpose than the gospel message first and foremost. He that believeth is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned. And these signs shall follow them that believe. In my name shall they cast out devils. They shall speak with new tongues. They shall take up serpents. If they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover. So he gives them the Great Commission, talks to them about belief and unbelief, and then he reminds them that there are going to be signs, which did come. And these signs, at the time of the if you go back to the book of Acts, I suppose there's an example of all this, these signs in the book of Acts, except for maybe the one about the poison. I don't know if there's a account of that, but the idea was that the early church, especially the Jewish church, Gentiles joining the church, I don't think so. So we should read the book of Acts, and you'll get an understanding of this, I guess, the struggle of the early church to accept non-Jews. And these signs God gave, I'm not trying to say that God doesn't do this nowadays. What am I trying to say? That these signs that God gave were material in changing people's minds. Let me give you an example. So on the day of Pentecost, the 11, well, I guess they'd picked another disciple by then, or another apostle by then, but I was going to say 11 apostles or 12. When they preached, right before that Peter preached that message there in the second chapter of Acts, every man in the city heard these men speak in their own language, even though they were all from different countries. Okay. Somebody said, I saw that on the internet, and they were speaking baby talk. It's not what the Bible says. The Bible says they spoke in languages. Okay, so you can forget the baby talk stuff. I don't know what that's about. It may be popular, but it's not Bible. They were speaking in languages that people could understand, like real languages, like Spanish, like French or whatever. I don't know what language they spoke in. The Bible's not. It just mentions the places these men were from, because Jerusalem was filled with Jews who lived in other places. And they said, that's my native tongue. They said, no, it's not. It's my native tongue. The other guy said, no, he's speaking in my tongue. He's speaking in my language. Uh-oh. So it got people's attention, because how can it be that I hear Greek, but you say it's not, it's Swahili, and this guy says, no, it's Latin. Something's going on here. It got people's attention. It worked. It was material in convincing people that this was a work of God. Then when the Gentiles are brought in, God did the same miracle amongst them, and the point was made, hey, look, we've got to acknowledge these Gentiles. They've got God too, because God worked this same miracle in amongst the Gentiles as he did amongst us. So how are we going to say that's not of God, that the Gentiles can be saved? So there are material examples of these things changing the way it would go. In other words, God uses the miracle to, I hesitate to say that he's trying to prove that he's real. I mean, because you'll get into this, people say, well, then I want God to prove it to me. God doesn't perform miracles for the church because we say we need God. God, we need you to perform a miracle. Somebody says, oh, yeah, he does. No, he doesn't. It says, anything I ask in his name, it says right in there. Okay, did you read the whole chapter? When you read the Bible, you can't just take verses out. You got to read that whole chapter. He was talking about when you're doing my work, when you're trying to reach the world, when you join my team and you're doing my work for me, then you ask for what you need and I'll provide it. He's not talking about prosperity gospel on TV. He's not talking about that at all. You need to read the whole Bible and read all the passages surrounding what you're talking about before you start saying that God, all I got to do is we all got to join hands and we can do, hey, that's not Bible. So in order to move the church along, and God wants to do a miracle, he can do it. The Apostle Paul picks up a bundle of sticks in the book of Acts, and there was a poisonous snake in there, and it lashed onto his arm, and all the natives on the island said, this man's a murderer or something like that. And now fate has finally caught up to him, and they all stood back and watched for him to drop over dead. And Paul looked at the snake and took it and threw it in the fire and laid the wood down, and he kept working and doing what he was doing. And they all stepped back and talked to him. He must be a god or something, because he did drop over. There's something to this thing. And so they sat down and said, tell us what this is. So God, in order, because he cared about these heathen people, God did a miracle. God does miracles when it suits God, not when it suits us. And there's been a lot of times I wanted a miracle and I didn't get one. But there's been times when I had no clue that God was going to do something miraculous, and he did it. And so when it works for God and when it furthers what he's trying to do, I think God does more of those. There's some other examples here, laying on the hands of the sick and stuff. Now, somebody said, well, if you're really saved, all you got to do is lay your hands on people that are sick. So really quickly, let me talk to you. Jesus, in the book of Matthew, went to a city in Galilee, and the Bible says Jesus is the he in that sentence. He could not do many works in that city because of their unbelief. This is Jesus. So he said, well, Jesus lost his power. No, it's because of their unbelief. And he said, well, I'm not going to. Paul says that in the 4th chapter of 2 Timothy, that I left so-and-so at Miletus sick. So if Paul has this carte blanche, I can heal anybody, anytime, anywhere, why leave that guy sick in that city? Because Paul doesn't have carte blanche healing powers. Paul used God to perform healings when God wanted to perform a healing. Okay? Nobody in the Bible and nobody today has the gift of healing. The Bible talks about gifts with an S, gifts of healings. So God gives out those gifts, and he's the one giving. It's not in a person. So just a little help for you, if you little things for you to think on as you read these kind of things, and if people start poking holes in the air with their finger, telling you what all this means. You need to read the Bible. That's what you need to do. I do too. And we'll get a better understanding of what the Bible's talking about. So then after the Lord had spoken unto them, this Mark kind of shortens this up. He doesn't give, actually Jesus was risen and spent 40 days. So Mark doesn't go into all that. He just quickly goes from go ye into all the world to, so that after the Lord had spoken to them, he was received up into heaven and sat on the right hand of God. And they went forth and preached everywhere, the Lord working with them and confirming the word with signs following. Amen. Well, that did happen, but he doesn't discuss the intervening time. And the intervening time is 40 days. In the intervening time, Jesus is teaching and explaining and opening their eyes up and showing them. And even after his ascension in the book of Acts, they're still waiting. So Mark sort of skips ahead and sort of sums up what they ended up doing. But there's quite a bit of time in here, so it's condensed. Mark has been a condensed book. As we've read through it, if you're familiar with Matthew, familiar with Luke, familiar with John, particularly the book of Matthew, you can compare these two books and see that it's been like a whirlwind. Now, I haven't went a whirlwind pace with it, but if you could read this book of Mark, sit down and read it in probably well within 30 minutes, and probably quicker than that for some of you faster readers. It's a very short book, very simple in its description of the life of Christ. Very used, probably, but one of the easiest books if you could translate it and get it to heathen people. Be easier for them to understand. Not a lot of scriptural references. There's some, but not a lot. So the book of Mark, sometimes I felt like we weren't going to get done with it, but we did. And so we're going to take a turn next week, Lord willing, and time permits. We're going to take a different turn, and we're going to look at the book of Jonah. So we're going to turn it over to Brother John and ask him to dismiss the class today.